Marhaba, ahlan wa sahlan. If you got your book, go ahead and open the book to page 66. We are going to do part 1 of Unit 4. And in this unit, we're going to start off with a letter called the Hamza. So before we even talk about what the Hamza looks like, we have to talk a little bit of the detail of where it comes from. So we have, for instance, right, we have the letter Ya and the letter Waw. And both of these letters function as long vowels, but they also function as consonants, meaning that the Ya makes the Y sound sometimes and the Waw makes the W sound sometimes. But our other long vowel, the Alif, doesn't have a consonant sound. It only functions as a long vowel, okay? So you can never use the Alif as a consonant sound. But what if you have a word that you want to write that starts with the sound? For instance, or ukht or akhbar. How would you write that? How would you start the word with it? We can't use alif because alif makes the sound, and I'm trying to make a short sound here. Okay? Think of it this way. In English, if I said, for instance, the word uh-oh, what is that sound that we're starting both of these syllables with? It's the sound. That is what we call a glottal stop in English, okay? And it comes from the chest. And in English, all of our vowel sounds actually start with this glottal sound. So if I said the word up and over and under and around, they all start with different letters. But if we look at the sound here, the original, look at where is the point of articulation. Where does that sound originate from? Every single one of those sounds originates from the chest. It actually originates from the same point of articulation. So in Arabic, we represent that by one letter instead of writing multiple sounds, okay? And that letter that we're looking at is the Hamza, okay? So the Hamza, think of it as the letter that makes the literal sound. Okay, so if you had a word, for instance, if I said su'ila, or if I said as'ila, or if I said su'al, we have a in the middle of the word. If you didn't have this letter, how would you write that? There would really be no way of writing that word, right? So the way that we do that is by using the Hamza. So the Hamza is considered its own letter, and the symbol for the Hamza is this right here, okay? And what I want you to do is you're going to take a look at drill 1, and we're going to listen to some words and see if we can recognize whether the Hamza is in that word or not. And remember, it could be in the beginning, the middle, or the end of the word. The sound that we're listening for is the literal sound. And if the Hamza has a fatha, it's going to be a. If it has a dhamma, it's going to be u. And if it has a kasra, it's going to be I. Okay? A, U, I. And I know sometimes people get confused. Well, what about the fatha, dhamma, and kasra? Well, yeah, they make the A, U, I sound, but they have to be sitting on a letter, right? So if you have a ba, it makes the ba sound. If you have a ba with dhamma, it makes bu. If you have ba with kasra, it makes bi. But what if the word has the actual sound a in it without a different consonant, right? What if it has the actual sound u without a different consonant, or I? So then what would we do? Okay. So for instance, if I said any type of word that has, like, for instance, bada'a, bada'a, bada'a. It's a B sound with a fatha. It's a D sound with a fatha. But then what would we write for the last part? In order to just write a fatha like that, it has to be on top of a letter. So what letter is it on top of? This is the letter that it's on top of. Okay, that is the Hamza. So we're going to look at drill 1 and listen to some words and see if we can recognize the Hamza. Okay, so if we look at drill 1, and you can use Smart Sparrow to listen to them, but we're going to listen to them here.
سأل
Sa'ala. Sa'ala. That first letter is a sin. We don't have to write these words. The point is not to write it. The point is to recognize the Hamza. So we have the S sound, right, with the fatha, sa. Then you have a. sa'ala. And that can't be an alif because the alif's function is only to make the ah sound as a long vowel. And that S sound, we're not saying sa-la, right? We're saying sa-a-la, sa-a-la. So that in the middle of that word, that's the Hamza. Number 2.
بحث.
Bahath. You don't hear any Hamza in this word. You don't hear the actual sound a, u, e on its own. You just hear a ba, right? With the fatha, you hear ha, and you hear tha.
بئر.
Bi'r. Do you hear the sound in the middle of the word? That's what we call a glottal stop. That's the sound that we get when the Hamza has a sukoon on it. When it has a sukoon on it, it makes a sound, like you're stopping right in your chest. Bi'r. Right?
سلام.
Salam. Here we don't have a Hamza, we do have an Alif, right? Salam, la, the L sound is making the ah. So that's an Alif, that's not a Hamza. So remember, Hamza makes the sound on its own, it's short, right? It's a regular letter. And then this Alif is a long vowel making the ah sound, and it's elongating a different letter. So you only have an Alif, right, if it's elongating a different letter.
بئر.
We did that one.
سلام.
Just did that one. Okay, number
جئت.
Jitu. Do you hear the in the middle of the word? That's a Hamza.
خبيث.
Do you hear a Hamza? No. Khabith. So we have the ya as a long vowel, but there's no Hamza here.
سماء.
Sama. You hear the at the end? That is a Hamza.
ثبات.
Thabat. No Hamza.
أب.
Ab. What starts this word? Is the sound. Ab. That's the Hamza.
كلام.
Kalam. No Hamza.
إخوة.
Ikhwa. What would make the sound in the beginning of the word? That would be a Hamza and it has a kasra on it. Ikhwa.
سؤال.
Su'al. What makes the sound in the middle of that word? Su'a. Ah. There is an alif, but the alif is not sitting by itself. Alif has to elongate a different sound. And what's the sound that it's elongating in this word? Is a Hamza. So if you have a Hamza followed by an alif, that's going to make the sound, right, in the middle of a word. Su'a. Su'a. Su'al. Right? How would we write that otherwise? If we didn't have a Hamza, it would just be the sound of that S sound, the scene with an alif, which would be sa. But there's a break in the middle of that word because there's 2 syllables. Su-a, ah. That's the Hamza in the middle of that word. Okay, so let's do some practice with writing the Hamza, and then over time it will become a little bit easier. So the Hamza is a special letter. Think of it kind of like a king. And a king has to sit on a throne. So the Hamza is like that. It is almost always going to be sitting on a throne. We call this a kursi, which is a chair that it sits on. And the chairs that you will see the Hamza sit on, sometimes you'll see it sit on an alif, sometimes you'll see it sit on a waw, and sometimes you'll see it sit on a ya chair without the dots. So it can sit on an alif, waw, or ya. These are basically long vowels that are acting as chairs. And don't get it confused for the letter. So if you were to see this, and I said, what letter is that? The letter is the Hamza. The chair, its only function is so that the Hamza can sit in the word and be connected somehow, because it has a shape that's a little bit hard to connect. Okay, so the chair only functions as allowing the Hamza to sit in the word, to connect in the word. That is it. It doesn't give it sound. It's not the letter itself. So if you were to see a Hamza sitting on a waw, you wouldn't say this is a waw. You would just say this is a Hamza. It happens to be sitting on a waw chair. Okay, and then there are some times where you'll see Hamza by itself, and we'll look at examples of that. So in this lesson, we're going to focus on what the Hamza looks like in initial position. Medial position we'll come back to in a couple of units, and then we'll look at it in one of its final positions. Okay, so it does have some multiple types of ways it can be written depending on where it is in the word and what sound it's making in the middle. So we'll come back to that. Okay, so in initial position, it's very simple. The Hamza will always, always, always sit on an Alif chair. Okay, in initial position. So if the word starts with the A sound, it will look like this, with a fatha. If the word starts with the U sound, it's going to sit on the Alif and it will have a dhamma. And if it's starting with the I sound, it's going to sit on the Alif but underneath it with a kasra. So A, U, I, initial position. A, U, I. Okay, so let's look at some examples. And this right here, the letter itself is Hamza. Some people call it Alif Hamza to remind yourself that it's sitting on an Alif, but do not ever call this letter an Alif. It is not an Alif. It is a Hamza. Okay, so let's look at some examples of words. So if I wanted to write the word ab, ab, it's the A sound and the B sound, ab. Because it's a short A, we're going to start the Hamza here. We're going to sit it on top of the Alif because it's in initial position, and it has a fatha, A. And then we only have one other letter, and that is the letter Ba. And the rule of connection is it's going to connect the way the chair connects. So the chair here is an Alif. Does Alif connect to the next letter? It does not. So that means the Ba has to be sitting on its own. Ab. Ab, vocab word, means dad. So I want to now take this word and make it my dad. What letter do I have to add to make it mine? Good, we add a ya. So if I take the word a and b, ab, and put a ya after it, now it's a, and the ba is followed with the e sound, abi. Abi, my dad. Okay. Let's do another one. Similar sound, different letters. Ach. 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 Again, we're starting with the a sound, and it's a fatha. Ach. Cha, cha, cha. We're going to stop on the cha. There's only one letter after it. Ach. And ach means brother. So how would we say my brother? We're going to say achi, achi. Achi meaning my brother. Okay, let's do another one. We'll do another family member. Ukht. Ukht. Oh. In this case, we're starting with the Hamza, but it's making the U sound. So we're going to put a dhamma on top of it. U. And then we have the kha. Ukh. What's happening on the letter kha? We're not saying kha, khu, khi. There's no long vowel after it, so that's a sukoon. Ukh. T. And a ta. Ukht. Ukht, which is sister. Okay. Now, if I wanted to say my sister, what letter would I add to the end of this word? We take the same word and we end it with a ya. Ukhti, meaning my sister. Ukhti. Let's do another one. This one won't be a vocab word and it's not a family member. Ithbat. Ithbat. So in this case, we're starting with the I sound, and that's going to be a kasra. So when you have the Hamza with the kasra, we're going to put it below the Alif. Okay? So if this is our line, it would go below. Then we have the letter tha. What's happening on the letter tha? Ith. We're stopping on it. So tha with the sukoon, ba alif, and ta. Ithbat. Ithbat means proof. It won't be on your vocab list. But now we have examples of the Hamza with the fatha, a dhamma, or kasra, all in medial position. Okay, so we now have the Hamza in initial position, right? It'll always sit on the alif. Be right back. We're going to come back to the medial position. Now, in final position, if you have a Hamza and it's after a long vowel, Okay, we're only going to look at the Hamza when it's after a long vowel in final position. So for instance, let's say I have the letter Alif and in a word like ma, and then the sound, which is the Hamza, a glottal stop at the end. So if I have a long vowel, whether it's an Alif, a Waw, or a Ya, and then the last letter of that word is the Hamza, then it's going to sit on the line by itself like that. And that's the only time that you're going to see it sitting by itself, is if it's after a long vowel. Okay, so let's look at, for instance, a couple of words. Let's do ja'a, ja'a, ja'a. We're going to take a jim, alif, ja, and then we're making the sound. That sound at the end of this word, because it's the last letter and it's after a long vowel, we're going to sit it on the line by itself, just like this, ja'a. Now, if we were to pronounce this, let's say without the fatha, if I had this written and I didn't have a fatha on it, then the Hamza would be stopping, right? So anytime you have a word, any word that we've done, for instance, we've done the word bab, right? What do we do on the last letter? We pronounce it with a sukoon, basically, is what we're doing. You don't have to write the sukoon on the last letter. We just assume that we stop on the last letter. We just stop on the sound of the last letter. So if we have a Hamza at the end of the word like this, and there's no haraka, there's no vowel on it, we're just going to stop on it with that glottal stop sound. Ja, ja. Okay, so this ja'a, ja. So now let's compare some sounds, okay? Let's compare some sounds. And I apologize if you hear any noises. There is an alarm going off behind me that I cannot control. So if I have a jim with just a fatha, how would we pronounce that? Ja. So if we have a jim alif here, it's just going to be ja. So notice the difference here. Ja, ja. There's nothing at the end. It's just an alif. Ja. And if I add here a Hamza to the end, now it becomes ja, ja, with the sound. And if I take that same sound and I put a fatha on it, now it's ja'a. So let's look at the difference between all of these. Ja, 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 ja'a, ja, 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 ja'a. And I'm going to add one more, not to confuse us, but just to show what if we have a short vowel. So if I have a jim and a fatha, and then I have a Hamza afterwards. Notice the Hamza is sitting on an alif. We'll cover this a little bit later in the chapter. But in terms of pronunciation, this right here is the letter jim with a fatha, followed by the Hamza. And because the Hamza is the last letter, we're pronouncing it with a sukoon. And this would be ja, ja. And if I had the same exact letters and I put a fatha, this would be ja'a. Notice the difference here between ja'a and ja'a. So in this, in number 4, how many letters are there? There's 3 letters. There's the jim, there's the alif, and then the Hamza. But in this one, there's only 2 letters. Because remember, when you see the Hamza sitting on an alif, it's not an alif. It's just the Hamza. All right? The alif is just functioning as a chair for the Hamza. So when you are looking at this, the alif, if the Hamza is sitting on it, is not considered a letter in that. It's just the chair. Okay? So we would have here ja and ja'a. If you want a little bit of help with transliterating this, Hamza is usually written as an apostrophe. So for instance, ja'a here, you could write it like this, ja'a. And if you were to write this one, we would just write it ja. And if you were to write this one here, we would say ja'a. Okay. And if you were to write this one, we would say ja'a. Okay, which is the same as what we just did here. Whereas here, we just have ja and ja. And in this one, we could say ja with the sound at the end. Okay, so that is the Hamza. You're going to go ahead and do some practice with it, with the dictation drills. And then we'll have more words in the next lesson where we can practice this.